You can type in your comments in Facebook and I'll be able to see them here and answer your questions. I'm Mike Montague. I am Global Head of Content at Sandler Training. And what that means is that I create all of, or help create with a team of people, all the content that we share worldwide for sales and leadership tips. If you're not familiar with Sandler Training, we do sales management and customer service training for individuals all around the world in, I think, like over 30 countries now, over 250 locations. And what we're doing is we're helping people grow their business through sales and through leadership and communication principles. So I host the podcast, I host webinars, I host our live summits when we get to do those again, and help create content for blogs, white papers, and all kinds of things. So you can ask me anything about content creation, type those in the chats. You can also ask me anything you want about audio stuff. So in my 20s, I was on the radio and I was Romeo on the top 40 station here in Kansas City, where I'm broadcasting from right now. And my passion kind of became podcasts then. I started a podcast really early when they first became a thing in like maybe 2005, something like that. And it was a local Kansas City podcast. Since then, I've launched a couple of different projects and done some series, but the How to Succeed podcast, you see the link over here on the screen. It's sandler.com/podcast. You can subscribe in iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, and check out some of my work there. But we've had over 1 million downloads in the last 4 years. I think we're at like 400 episodes now. I've interviewed famous authors like Bob Berg, famous athletes like Ruben Gonzalez. He was a 3-time Olympian, and all kinds of cool things. The drummer for Pink, and lots of different fun things. So what I wanted to talk to you about today is really how to create a profitable podcast and a powerful podcast that helps you build an audience and helps you build credibility and helps you make money for your business. Since this is the virtual entrepreneur convention, I think entrepreneurs need to find creative, bootstrappy ways to build an audience and get more clients. Because at Sandler, what we do is help people, use their sales and their marketing to generate leads. But sometimes you need somebody to talk to first, right? So it helps a lot to in a podcast, build an audience of people who are listening to you, who see you as an authority, and you can have some fun along the way. And one of my top tips, you can interview prospects on your podcast and start building a relationship with them. So it's a lot of fun. We'll talk for the next hour or so. I see a couple of people watching live now. You can type those chats into the comments area and I'll see them here on the screen. So if you have any questions, just write a comment below the live video here and I'll do my best to answer it. I have a prepared presentation and structure, but I don't have slides for you today. I thought we'd have a conversation. So certainly type in the comments and share anything that you have. Again, my name's Mike Montague with Sandler Training. I'm the global head of content there, and I'm host of the How to Succeed podcast. So if you go to sandler.com/podcast, you will see my work. So let's start with why to podcast. I think there are several reasons for that, but for you as an entrepreneur, I think it is really about getting good at your craft. And maybe podcasting is not the thing. Maybe you don't love audio, and that's okay. But what you can do with a podcast is set up a regular schedule. And I love this because every week I have an episode to come out. It makes me do my job. It makes me do something on a regular schedule to build my business, to think about credibly how I speak about my business. And it helps me regularly get in touch with guests because I do an interview podcast. So I think one of the things we're going to talk about here in a second is how to create your sustainable structure. But even just having a podcast builds your audience. It builds your domain authority in what you do because you have to get good about talking about it. It helps you be more authentic and be yourself. Sometimes in sales calls or in other venues or on social media, we're trying to carefully craft our persona. And what makes more sense is to be ourselves and to share our expertise and talk about with passion what we do for a living, so that other people who want what we have are attracted to that. When you curate some sort of social media presence or some sort of blog or white paper or ebook, those are all great content marketing things, but sometimes you can attract people who don't really love you and the way that you do things. With a podcast, I think you get to be yourself and you get to be the star of the show. So when you attract people who like that podcast, you're attracting people who like you, what you do, and how you do it. And that's a huge piece of the puzzle. And I see a comment here from Keith. So I want to get right to the questions because I know some of you can't stay for the whole hour. So whenever you pop one in, I'm going to try to pause and answer the question as soon as possible. When it comes to content creation, do you post the same thing across multiple platforms, or is it different content for each account? That's a great question, Keith. I would say start with the same content on all the channels, especially for podcasts. When you're an entrepreneur in a small business, you don't really have the bandwidth to go super niche. However, each platform is a little bit different. So sometimes you'll find way more people will engage with video on Facebook than they will with a link to an audio podcast. But when you have an audio podcast, it's great for mobile devices when people are traveling on planes or out walking and running and cleaning the house and stuff. They can't watch videos or read white papers. They have to listen to something. So there is something to breaking up your content creation and niching down for different channels. But specifically in this hour, I want to talk about how you would use a podcast and why you would do that. So that's a great question. Is I think also when doing a podcast, you want to think about where people are listening to that. Why would they subscribe to a podcast? When are they listening to it? And who are you making it for? And the last thing before I move out of why podcast, I wanted to talk to you about is the number one reason is to not become famous and make a whole bunch of money from the podcast. A lot of times you'll hear stories of people that get a whole bunch of downloads or can get sponsorships and advertisers. Usually that money just covers the cost of making the show. So I'm lucky to have Sandler Training and be the sponsor and the creator of the podcast. So we don't have to have outside sponsors, but we cover the few $100s a month that we spend on editing and on hosting the podcasts and creating them, that we don't have to worry about getting an outside sponsor or directly making money from the podcast. And when I say directly, that's an important point, because what you'll find is you want to find indirect ways of making money through your podcast. When you have something to share on social media, that gets you noticed. When you become an expert or a credible authority in your industry, people ask you to do virtual webinars like this or speak at a local chamber, and then you can get money from those activities. Also, I hinted at earlier, interviewing people on your podcast. If you interview people, you can just have networking and referral relationships. You can actually interview prospects on a regular basis and then get leads out of it from that way. But generally, people don't listen to your podcast and then click and buy something from you because you put a link or you mentioned something in the show. I hope that makes sense. If you have any questions on that, type those in the comments. Now, when you're actually setting it up, the number one key is to create a sustainable structure for your podcast. Think about how you will keep this thing going. There's really two types of podcasts that you can create. The first one is a short run series. Think of it like a Netflix series where there's 6, 12, 24 episodes. You record them all at once, and then you release that out as a podcast that people can download and subscribe to, and you can share throughout the year. That's one way to do it, and it's not bad. You can actually do that quite effectively, especially in events like this. If you take each speaker and you make them a podcast, you can release them as a podcast series. And other people with creative professions have done that really well. So storytellers like to do like the Serial episode, is a really famous podcast. However, most people, and especially businesses, I think you want your business to be ongoing. So if you have a great serial idea, go for it. But most people want an ongoing podcast, like an interview show. And you think about that like a radio show, or the famous podcasts like Tim Ferriss or Joe Rogan and people like that, where they host an interview show or a regular weekly cadence of releasing episodes. And to do that, it takes a lot of preparation. And my first recommendation would be to keep it simple. My show asks people 3 questions every single time. It's, what is the attitude part that's key to success? What is the behavior key to success? And what is some techniques, tools, and tips that we can use to become successful? So on the How to Succeed podcast, every guest I come on, I ask those same 3 questions. And I don't have to prepare a brand new script or create or write something from scratch every week. I just have to book the guest, then they bring the new idea, and I ask those same format questions. You'll see that a lot with radio shows and other people that are really good at broadcasting, is they will set up a structure so that they know what they're asking people and what they're producing every time. Think about like the Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon. They have an opening monologue, they have a guest, they banter, they take a break, they do a skit, they come back and they have a second guest. And so they have a clear structure, even though those pieces and content change every time. The clear structure and framework makes it easy for them to reproduce the show night after night. So if you're going to do a podcast ongoing, and I've been doing mine for like 4 years now, you got to make a really easy structure that you can keep it going sustainably. If you're doing something like a blog where you're creating an idea from scratch and trying to do some complicated editing every week, you're probably going to get burnt out and run out of ideas pretty quick. So if you have ideas like that, do a serial podcast, do a limited run, and then think about how you can do a different set later. The other important part of the structure is a publishing calendar. So the great thing about podcasts is there's really no rules. You can dump 10 episodes on one day. You can do a regular weekly podcast. You can do a monthly podcast. You can do a daily podcast. It doesn't really matter so much. But again, I would encourage you to choose a sustainable structure here. So one of the things you might think about is, how often can I commit to this? How long is the show is another great question. Mine's about 20 minutes. I find that great for a commute, a workout, or doing any type of errand podcast listening. Anything longer than 20 minutes, you really need to get people's commitment to it. But short podcasts are really great too. I just happen to do an interview show, and it's really hard to learn anything in 5 minutes or less. But if you're doing an audio monologue or some other type of creative endeavor, the shorter might be better for you. So when thinking about the framework, the reason I chose weekly is that I could sustain that. I only have to do one interview every week, and I can work ahead of time. So I have like 8 to 12 weeks in the can already, and they're scheduled to release every single Monday. So my episodes come out Monday at midnight. They're pre-recorded. They're scheduled out ahead of time. I'm through, I think, the 1st of July right now. And all I have to do is remember to at least record one a week to keep that distance going. And it's very sustainable. It's been very successful for us too, because your audience knows every Monday there's a new episode waiting for them. So when you get subscribers, they know what the cadence is. If you don't pick a calendar, you don't hold yourself accountable to recording, and you don't, your audience doesn't know when to expect new episodes. So if you're really sporadic, you'll lose audience because they forget to come back and check. When they're subscribers and they know something's coming out every week or every month, they know when to look, but it also gives you something to share, again, on social media or in your email, or anytime you are up speaking or doing any other type of promotion. You can say, hey, subscribe to my podcast. Go to Sandler.com/podcast. You can subscribe on iTunes or Google Play. And it always gives me something to talk about because there's a regular weekly cadence there. There's always something new and fresh. And I found that 52 episodes a year also helps you build audience faster. So if you publish every day, you'll ramp up an audience even faster, but that's a heck of a lot of work. You're committing to basically being a full-time podcaster at that point. So what I do instead is take the weekly cadence, because monthly, think about that, to get to 100 shows, you're going to have to do that for 8 years. If you do it weekly to get to 100 shows, that's 2 years. And so you can build your audience quite a bit faster. Any questions on creating a sustainable structure for your podcast and a plan, or how to make this worth your time and effort? Type those in the comments area now. I have Facebook open, and I have some comments popping up here live in front of me. So happy to stop at any time and answer your questions here. But tip number 2 for you is production, publishing, and promotion. These are the grits of how you actually do it. And you need to get committed to doing these behaviors on a regular basis. So whenever you create a podcast, you have to think about scheduling guests, interviewing the guests, editing the podcast, publishing it out somewhere so that it shows up on a blog or an RSS feed that people can subscribe to. And then you have to promote and share that podcast. And I see a ton of mistakes that people make when doing a podcast here. First, we talked about not adhering to a schedule. Second is not preparing people for the interview or not having a process to get regular guests. So you want to make sure you always ask every guest to introduce you to another guest and get plenty of referrals and get a stream of people built out there, so you don't have to hustle every single week or find somebody or repeat guests. You can keep your show going on a regular basis. Editing is tricky. I wonder how much we should talk about that here. It's pretty easy to record a podcast. You can record audio on a phone. You can do it in any regular Zoom or go to meeting platform. You can get a couple of people online. I use Squadcast. It's a really cool tool. Get a couple of people on the line, record the audio, but then you have a challenge. If you didn't get a super clean recording, if somebody messed up, or you just want to clean it up, make it shorter, make it better, you're going to require some sort of editing. And those tools are generally GarageBand or Adobe Audition. Any audio editor will work. I recommend setting things up so that you get the cleanest possible recording first. But if that's not the case, go through, cut out the ums and ahs, the awkward pauses, and the mistakes, chop off the beginning and end and make sure it's clean. If you want, you can add music underneath or other cool special effects, but I think those are all advanced things. I would recommend keeping your podcast short and just trying to get one clean recording all the way through from start to finish and not do a whole lot of editing. Publishing is the easiest part of this. When you go to publish it, all you need is an MP3 audio file, and you can publish that to a blog and use your blog feed to submit to iTunes and Google Play. Or I recommend using a podcast host. I use Libsyn. It stands for Library Syndication, and it's Libsyn, Libsyn.com. You can also use something like Podbean, or there's a bunch of other podcast hosting. You could just Google. They're not really expensive. 15, 20 bucks a month, I think will get you started with a podcast. If you're posting a lot of audio, you might need to pay a little bit more for that, but not too bad at all. I think really that's just kind of like filling out a blog. I don't think we need to go into a whole lot here. You just upload the audio to a place that stores it for you so that people can subscribe to that feed and pull down each little pod by itself. And each little MP3 becomes its own podcast that people will pull down and listen to. And then you can share those links out on social media, email, and other marketing. The hard part is the last one, promotion. And that's where a lot of people miss. They think the hard part is the production and the editing and the publishing. That part is the easy part, at least for me anyway. The promotion is the hard part because getting somebody to listen to it is a lot tougher. So what you want to do is really, again, that's why I like an interview show. You can tag your guests in it, but I would publish on LinkedIn, Facebook, or Twitter, tag other people that you think might be interested, include the links absolutely everywhere. So social media, in your email, anytime you're doing any type of promotion, get those subscribe links out there. Ask people to subscribe and share your episodes, and really figure out a good promotional plan. I'm sure there'll be some people here over the next 2 days talking about marketing and how to share that out. Saw another question come in there. When it comes to monetization, is it all because of ad revenue, or do you also do affiliate marketing, sponsorships, or something else? I would say you're probably not going to make a whole lot of money until you get a large audience. Like, I'm up to about 4,000 downloads an episode. I would say even like 10 becomes interesting. You could make maybe $100 to $1,000 an episode if you were at 10,000 downloads. That's going to take a lot of work. Most podcasts have 6 episodes and they have about 100 downloads, which people do not want to pay significant amounts of money to advertise on a podcast with 100 downloads. So what I would say, Keith, there is something else. Find out either a sponsorship to at least cover your costs of it. Like maybe you can talk to a local chamber or an industry networking group that you could have them sponsor your show to cover your costs of investing in Libsyn, the editing and the software and stuff. And then really work on how do you use this to get leads for your existing business. I don't think right now I would recommend trying to make podcasting your business. I don't think anybody's really making money off of that, except for people with large audiences that were already making money off of their shows. So again, people like Tim Ferriss, famous authors, Oprah, she can have a podcast and have enough people listening to make advertising revenue. Most startup entrepreneurs wouldn't fit that bucket. Still got a few minutes here to talk about production, publishing, and promotion. Do you have any questions about how to actually get a show up there? I think I've shared a lot of my techniques and tips. Promotion, I think, comes down to getting other people's audiences. So one of the easiest ways I've been able to grow my audience is by interviewing people larger than me. So when I get a famous author or speaker on the show, they promote it on their social channel. So that's why I like interview shows, is because we can share audience and go together, even if that's a group. So I've interviewed famous CEOs of large companies. Well, of course, their company wants to share it out. So I've interviewed people like Evernote or Zoom video conferencing. People at that will share it out on theirs. And then that helps us grow and reach their audiences and collect, parts of their audience that like what we're doing. All right. Well, I think we're at a pretty good spot here. Again, I appreciate you guys watching there. So type in any questions you have. We have 8 people on the line. If you have any questions about podcasting, type them in. We've already talked about creating a sustainable structure, production, publishing, and promotion. We talked about why have a podcast and what it would do for you as an entrepreneur. So we can circle back to any of those. I'm Mike Montague, Global Head of Content at Sandler Training. Sandler is the worldwide leader in sales and management training. So we have 250 locations. We train about 30,000 people or so every year in sales and management. And I help make all of the content and share that out. So podcasts, webinars, blogs, white papers, online courses, all types of different content. All right. Keith, great comment there. Says the networking that comes from meeting all of the successful guests is a huge part. That's why podcasts don't have to be interview shows, but I think that's the best way to do it, because when you have an interview show, you get to do a ton of networking. And I've had great conversations with really big time authors. I've mentioned Bob Berg a couple of times just because he was one of my favorites, but he wrote the book, The Go-Giver. If you haven't read that one, I highly recommend it. But we hit it off. He's a fan of Sandler Training and what we do. We had a great time. We were laughing. A lot of speakers are really nice, kind people too. And so I make friends. I connect with them on all the social media channels when I have them on. And then I can always reach out to them again, have them back on the show, or start some sort of post-show conversation when it goes back out to promote. Thank them for being on the show. Ask them for introductions to other guests. I think that's great. And can start conversations, be a guest on their show. So Manesh asked a great question there. How would you recommend getting top celebrities on your show? I do two things, get introductions and trade interviews. So you can say, hey, I know you're always looking for guests. If they have a podcast, I'd love to be on your show and I'd be happy to have you on mine. A lot of times it's just as simple as asking. So if you can get an email or connect with them on social media. I interviewed the drummer for Pink, the rock star Pink, because he connected with me on Twitter and I thought that was interesting. Saw he did some speaking and just asked. So I just asked him and he said yes. And we sent a link. I have a really easy scheduling link for people to pick a time that works for them for the interview. And I haven't had a whole lot of people say no. I've maybe gotten some no answers where people are too busy, but haven't had a no. So I'm looking forward to stretching my comfort zone and going even bigger this year. Rita, I appreciate the question there. She said, any suggestions on how this can be used for donations for nonprofits? That's a good question. Again, typically, directly asking an audience for donations or to buy something doesn't really work too well because the audience isn't big enough and the people that are listening are generally people that already like what you do. So if I was at a nonprofit, what I would do is tell stories of the people that you're helping and then ask your normal call to actions during the episode. So beginning and end, you could say something like, hey, if you'd like to support our cause, go to blank.com and you can make a donation. But we're going to tell a story of some of the good work we're doing and where your money goes during this podcast and kind of do a who you're helping show. And then you can share those stories out everywhere else and look to attract new people. So when people connect with that, maybe instead of asking for donations, you ask for them to come to an event you're doing or sign up for your email list or some other way to start that relationship. Because podcasting is a personal relationship and fans definitely subscribe. But when you're using it for marketing purposes and reaching new people, it's one of those frontline tactics. So people don't know you well enough to just say, hey, here's 10 grand because you made an awesome podcast. They might be connected to it and then want to join more of the group and get to know you. So they'll probably visit your website. They'll connect with you on social media if they like the episode. And then you can kind of build the relationship from there. Has running a podcast helped you be seen as more of an expert in your industry and helped you boost credibility? The answer is definitely yes on that one. So I think that's one of the best reasons to start a podcast is to become an authority in your industry. It really helps you solidify your thinking and your thoughts, but it also positions you as an expert. So I've seen people from real estate, again, nonprofits, salespeople, start a show simply to be seen as somebody who is a mover and shaker in the industry. If you get really good at doing a show, I've even seen people buy time on local like AM talk radio stations and air their podcasts so that it becomes even bigger. You reach a new audience out there, but then you're seen as the guy who has a successful podcast. We happen to have an award-winning podcast with the How to Succeed podcast. We released a press release when we hit 1 million downloads. And I saw people start connecting with me on LinkedIn, reaching out, and especially other people now this year are coming to me to be a guest on the show rather than me reaching out to them. So if you do it consistently enough and credibly enough and you're committed to this long term, you just do it long enough, you will build that authority that people see you as an expert. It's similar to writing a book. I would say it's more effort because I've also wrote a book on how to use LinkedIn. And that one did great. I got 80,000 downloads of the free book by writing a book, but taking it from there, the podcast is an ongoing thing where the book's kind of at an event. It's on LinkedIn, so it can seem like it's stale and it's been out there a while. Why would I want a book from 5 years ago on LinkedIn? I can answer that question. I solved that, by the way. I just wrote it about strategy and not about buttons and tools. But the podcast is every day. I'm an authority now, right? Every week there's a new thing and I can switch. So in this pandemic, we've switched to crisis topics like how to prospect during a pandemic, how to sell ethically during a crisis, and do really cool cutting edge things that I think really help build your credibility. So as I move on to our next big section that I wanted to talk about are the tech, the tools, and just general tips for how to make a great podcast. So first of all, I could tip my microphone down here and show you the microphone is covered by a pop filter there, and I really shouldn't have messed with my camera. But what I did was I bought a Blue Yeti microphone, and then I covered it with soundproofing material. So I have a blanket over the microphone, and I have some soundproofing foam panels below it so that if I knock on the desk or I'm typing and stuff, it doesn't create an echo back in the microphone. And the room here is not the best. So I have a little bit of an echo here in my room. So a small room, like a closet filled with clothes, will get you a really clean, great sound, but that's kind of annoying to do every time, is to move your laptop and your microphone into the closet. But set up your room as best you can to break up and muffle the sound so you don't get echoing back, and you can just test and try different things. But the Blue Yeti microphone, you can search on Amazon. It's about $100 or so. And it's a USB one, so it'll plug into any computer, and you can get really good audio out of that. And if you're going to do a video podcast, those are also really cool. So the camera I have is a Logitech Brio. It's a high definition webcam, and those are great. Even if you're just doing an audio podcast, you like to have a good video camera for conferencing with your guests, having meetings, and letting them see and get to know you while you're doing the show. Now, I mentioned earlier, when you're going to publish it out, you need to know how to publish a podcast. So I would use Libsyn, Podbean, any of the other good podcast hosting platforms to upload your MP3s to it and create a show out of it. So if you go to sandler.com/podcast, it'll redirect to my podcast page where you can see there's over 400 episodes. They're all stacked from newest to oldest, but you can search in there. On that page, you can subscribe to Google Play, iTunes, Spotify. You can search that feed in any podcast player around the world, and it'll find the RSS feed and allow you to listen to my show on any mobile device. So that's a really important key to using a podcast effectively, is using one of these podcast services. And again, it's about $20 a month, and that's ongoing. When you take it down or stop paying them, your podcasts go away. So that's a big commitment. You can also just upload an MP3 to your Facebook, LinkedIn account, or your blog, and it'll do the same thing, but you won't get that syndication push to iTunes and Google Play and Spotify and everything. So I really recommend, if you're going to do it professionally and do it well, to invest in a publishing platform there. The other tools I mentioned were GarageBand and Adobe Audition. I could share my screen and go through some of the things with you if we have time here. If you have any questions, just type them in the comments area. But basically, when you see audio, you see those wave-like squiggles, and you can go in and you can chop and you can move different parts of it. And if you get really good at it, you can subtract some background sound and other things, but you're probably going to want to watch some videos on how to do that, or take a mini course. the easiest thing to do is just trim the beginning and end. So if you can find a way to do your interview cleanly and record your opening and your closing all in one shot, then what you can do is just chop off any dead air at the beginning and the end of the podcast. And you don't have to mess with editing it too bad. The other tip I would give you is that if you're going to start cheap and quickly, one thing you can do is just use GoToMeeting, or Zoom has a great pause button in your webinar. So you can jump on a webinar, start recording, do your intro, record your podcast. If you need to take a break or something goes wrong, you can hit pause, then say even like pause and then cough, sneeze or whatever, then unpause and start the recording again and record the next part, and then pause and take a break and look at your notes and then hit record and go again. And that way you're kind of editing on the fly different sections of it. So a lot of times I'll do that if I have a really long presentation like I'm doing right now, and I just want to take each of my buckets and sections of the talk and record them all separately and then package them all together. A lot of times it makes sense to edit on the fly, or just allow myself time to cough, sneeze, or take a drink without having to go back and edit it later. So I don't want to overwhelm people or make it too technical there, but I've given you a lot of the great audio tips. Audio is more important to have high quality than video. People will put up with grainy video if they can hear the audio really well. But if you have background sounds and clicking and tapping and a hum in the back, especially when people wear headphones, that becomes very noticeable and annoying. So try to test it out and get it as quiet as possible, so that if you're recording and you're not talking, you just hear dead silence. It's a flat line on that audio recording, and there's no background sounds. That being said, it helps to have a ways to call timeout or to fix mistakes, because people will inevitably have to cough. The trash truck runs by, somebody starts mowing or hemming the hedges while you're trying to record, and all of that stuff gets really distracting. So I would say to make a plan to figure out how to get in a good quiet spot and keep it short, because the longer your episode, the more forgiving people are with mistakes, but the more things that can go wrong. So if you start with a nice short, like 5 to 20 minute podcast, a lot of times you can get through that without having too much trouble or editing on your hand. All right. Any other questions? We can take some time here to do more Q&A. If you have any, type those into the chat. I'll hit refresh here and just make sure I'm not missing any. But I was going to close up with some final tips about making a really great podcast. So for that, I would say that these are all attitudes to have when doing a podcast. So number one is, if you're really going to get committed to do this, and if you've sat through 40 minutes of me talking about a podcast, it sounds like you're interested, I would commit to doing something interesting. Nobody wants a lame podcast that's boring and doesn't help anybody and doesn't change anybody or isn't interesting. Think about how to make it truly remarkable that people would want to share with other people. So I'm going to steal a few marketing tips from Seth Godin. He is an awesome podcaster. You can check out his Akimbo podcast. But he has some great tips for making remarkable shows, things that'll get noticed. And he always says, make a ruckus. And I think, for podcasting, I would say make a noise and be heard. Do something worthy of listening to and taking people's time, and worthy of people wanting to share it out to other people, because that's how you grow an audience. If you do a blah podcast and people go, that was nice, they don't share it to anybody else. So you always have the same listeners, or maybe they don't even subscribe and you have to struggle to get listeners every single week. If you do something that's wow, that's impactful, that really is generous and helps people, then they go, oh, that's cool. Let me share that with somebody else. And that's how your podcast grows to bigger and bigger numbers. So be yourself, take a stand and make some noise. Don't be afraid to be passionate and go deep on a topic too. I think a lot of times we have a tendency to do surface level stuff and keep solving strangers' problems because we're trying to attract strangers and people that don't know what we do. But when you go super deep down the rabbit hole, when you get really nerdy on a topic, you attract people that really want the answers, that are passionate about what you're doing, and they're interested in hearing about what you're talking about. So don't be afraid to go deep, to show your passion, to really like get technical. Those are some of the cool things about podcasts that cause people to share and hit subscribe, is when you're solving deep, interesting problems. I would also say, don't be afraid to be creative and to get weird. If you do some unusual stuff, if you have fun with it, if you're laughing at yourself, people connect with that, and they connect with people that have personality. If it's really boring and there's no stories, there's no interesting, hot takes that they haven't heard before, you want to change their paradigm. You want to change their thinking in a way that makes them go, oh, I've never thought of it that way. And when that magic happens, that's when people engage with the podcast. That's when people want to reach out to you and ask your help because you said something that they didn't understand or they couldn't do by themselves. So I really recommend having some fun with it. Don't just hit record and say something. Think about choosing an interesting music. How can you have fun and laugh? A friend of mine in the Sandler Network this month has been doing a kind of Between Two Ferns podcast. If you're familiar with the comedian Zach Galifianakis, you know what I'm talking about. If you're not, Google Between Two Ferns. He's basically like roasting his guests or making fun of them and asking awkward questions and having a good time with it. And Nemo, one of our Sandler trainers, has that same personality. He loves kidding and messing around with people. And it makes for a really interesting show because it's not just the boring same old softball questions. So you have to be gentle with a tactic like that. You have to make sure it's all in good fun. But think about your industry. How can you put a spin on it? Mine is the How to Succeed podcast. So I ask people how they became successful. I ask them what their failures were. And it makes for more interesting, more personal conversations if we get to know each guest and what really they struggle with when trying to be successful. And I find that everybody's definition of success is different. So it's a very simple question, but it makes for a compelling podcast because it's a personal subject there. Finally, my last tip here is just another famous podcaster said this: press the damn button. And that's not the best language, but hit record, do it, go live if you have to. Just hit the button and record it. If you get started, your show will get better. That's the only way to get better, is to practice. So 400 episodes in, I'm a heck of a lot better podcaster than I was on episode 1. But even before episode 1, I had been in radio and broadcasting for 15 years at that point. So when people go, wow, you're really good at it, you're a natural, I said, you didn't hear me in my 20s. You didn't hear me at 21 struggling to come up with anything to talk to. Here's my funny story. I got fired by Billy Idol. I insulted the band Fall Out Boy with one of the questions I asked. I was completely unprepared for a spontaneous interview with Frankie Valli on the radio. And these are all things that I learned. I also got sick. I've had fights break out during my shows when I was doing live stuff. I've had all kinds of craziness happen that's made me stronger and a better broadcaster today. So if you just hit record, if you just hit publish, after that, good things will happen for you. But it all comes from learning those tough lessons, from figuring it out along the way. You're not going to start and have your first podcast be the one that goes viral and makes you millions of dollars, and it's like a TED Talk with 10 million views. That's not very likely or predictable and reliable. So what is predictable and reliable is if you do 400 episodes, you'll have good ones in there. You'll build an audience. You'll get to 1 million downloads. because you figured out how to do it along the way, and you've built an audience of people that care about what you care about when you're doing it. So I can give you about 15 minutes back here, or I can take any questions. I know we still have some people on the line, but I was just going to finish out with some Q&A. I encourage you to subscribe to the How to Succeed podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify. You can just go to sandler.com/podcast. All of those episodes are there. Also, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I recommend LinkedIn more than Facebook. I only do personal stuff here on Facebook, and I handle all the business stuff on LinkedIn. So it's linkedin.com/Mike D. Montague. Or if you'd like more information on Sandler, you can just go to sandler.com/sell, SELL, and you can subscribe to our online platform, which has all kinds of really cool stuff there for you, like from white papers, free books. My LinkedIn book is in there. We do video lessons and all kinds of great stuff. Sandler.com/sell. And just for fun, I was going to give you one more too, because for the next 30 days, we just released a brand new app called My Sandler. If you look in your app store for My Sandler, you can find all of the audio podcasts in a downloadable app. That's going to cost money on June 1st. So for the next 30 days, you can get as much Sandler audio as you would find helpful. And then we'll hit an update on June 1st, and you'll have to be a client to get access to that. So it's a special sneak preview beta launch just for our new app that we call My Sandler. Thanks again, Manesh, for inviting me, and great job on your session. I watched the second half of yours there. Great tips there. Mary, thanks for sticking through to the end. Any other questions or things here before we go? We'll just wrap up a little bit early. I appreciate you guys taking the time and hanging in there. It was fun. All right. One more from, looks like Damien there. Thank you for all your tips. What was the scheduling platform you used? It's called Libsyn, and it stands for Library Syndication, LIBSYN. And I can type some of these here in the comments too. I'll type the links to the show in the comments right below the video here. When I stop recording, I'll also share links to Libsyn, the Yeti microphone, and other cool things that I mentioned here. I'll come up with as many as I can and just type those in the comments. So thanks for sticking to the bitter end. Have a great week. Hit record. Press the damn button, have some fun, and check out the Sandler podcast, sandler.com/podcast. I'd love to have you listen. Tell me what your favorite episode is. I love to hear which ones resonate with people and which topics are important. Have a great weekend. Good luck.